Daryl Morey, general manager of the Houston Rockets' controversial Twitter on Hong Kong, has caused a huge uproar in China and a debate in the U.S. As Hong Kong has been plagued by radical protesters, often black-clad and masked, set fires on the streets, vandalized public facilities, including metro stations, and assault police, civilians, and businesses, Hong Kong SAR has implemented an anti-mask law, a common practice in Western countries, to ban people from wearing masks during public assemblies. When violence, fake news, misinformation, and foreign interference are making the situation complex, what shall be prioritized in addressing the crisis in Hong Kong? How will China respond to foreign intervention? And where is the practice of one country, two systems in Hong Kong heading? To discuss these issues and more, I'm happy to be joined in the studio by Anna Tangen, current affairs commentator. We shall also speak to Whitman Hong, Hong Kong deputy to 13th National People's Congress, and Victor Gao Zhikai, current affairs commentator via satellite. That's our topic. This is a dialogue. I'm Yang Ray. Welcome to Dialogue, Anna. Are you surprised that netizens in their millions in China vowed to boycott NBA performance in China? I mean, this is a very severe punishment. Obviously, it's a heavy loss for NBA commercially. What do you think of the consequences?
Well, keep in mind that the United States has the media, and China is often in a position where it has to accept a lot of criticism which they don't feel is applicable to them. China has the markets, and what you increasingly see is using those markets when people are doing things which they don't like. And this is not the only example. You also have Dolce & Gabbana, other brands. You know, NBA is not a necessity. It's about entertainment. It gets people, drawn in by the sport. But they're competing for dollars with every other entertainment venue, whether it's eating or going to a movie or whatever. So it's not surprising that if you're the general manager of a team which is supposedly beloved in China because of Yao Ming, and you say something like that, yes, you can exercise your free speech, but don't put your tagline after it and expect people won't notice that you're the general manager of a sports team.
Well, what do you make of the latest response from the president of NBA, the National Basketball Association? Even in the United States, he says, yes, indeed, he has the freedom of speech, but heavy losses in the Chinese market would be something major. What do you think of the mixed feeling of this guy, the big boss in NBA, that has immediately drawn fire from lawmakers in the D.C.?
Yeah, well, you can't win if you're head of the NBA right now, because if you acknowledge that China is a big market, and then you're caving. If you don't, then you're silly because you're losing a big market.
But many American multinationals would have to yield to political pressure from the White House on the issue of Huawei and the fifth generation of telecommunication.
Yeah, they are, and this is the point. We have a kind of separating of these two countries. People are very raw. You cannot continue this kind of all-around pressure that Donald Trump has instituted, economic, military, and political, trying to isolate China, trying to bring China to heel, and expect that people in China will just take that. People in China are very patriotic. They feel every bit as strong about China as Americans do about the U.S., and that is the issue here. You have these two entities rubbing up against each other, blaming each other for things that would have been, 5 years ago, no one would have paid much attention.
The issue of ideology will tend to explode, particularly in the bilateral relationship between the United States and China at the height of the trade war. Let me cross over to Mr. Whitman Hong, Hong Kong deputy to the 13th National People's Congress. Let's hear what he has to say. Hello, Mr. Hong. What do you think of the immediate response from locals in Hong Kong towards the Twitter about Hong Kong by the general manager?
Quite frankly, not much. I don't think people watch NBA that much in Hong Kong. I don't. Most of my friends don't. They watch football, but probably not basketball. So, unfortunately, this is not very high on our priority list. I mean, we are reading the news about those rioters, here and there, setting roadblocks, setting fires to Starbucks and all those kind of things. I mean, those are the things on the news.
If you review the history of the Olympic movement, it comes as no surprise that politics would always step in. to generate the front page stories. What do you think of the relationship between politics and sports? Do you think that, without exceptions, this time around, the Twitter emerged just in time to add to the crisis in Hong Kong?
I think, well, I don't think it actually adds too much to the crisis in Hong Kong. We already have a very severe crisis here. But, you know, talking about politics and sports, I mean, personally, I would think they should be separated, but unfortunately, because sport is related to culture, and culture always related to politics, so it's very hard. I think, just like you mentioned, I mean, anybody can have a freedom of speech, but then, even in the U.S., if a general manager of an NBA teams talk about some, for example, discriminating some colored population, I'm sure he's going to face the same kind of problem. So I would think for sports to stay out of politics, then people in sports should stay out of politics, do not comment on politics, whether left, right, or center.
Well, of course, sports is often masked in the camouflage of sports for the sake of sports, to get medals and to fight for the national pride. Let's come back to examine the issue of anti-mask law in Hong Kong. Do you think this bill is justifiable? Because all of the members on the cabinet of the HKSAR government have said loud and clear, look, we need to first and foremost stop the escalation of violence, and this approval of the law would help very much law enforcement personnel identify perpetrators of those who vandalize public facilities.
Well, the issue is this law should have been put in place much earlier, while these people were, as soon as they started committing acts of violence. Now remember, there's a very different, from a lawful assembly, people wearing masks or whatever. That's fine. There's no problem with that. I don't think anyone had a problem with it. It becomes a problem when you have basically armed youth. They have poles, they have masks, they have hats, hard hats. They're ready for battle, and they're going in and destroying things. You can't have that. First off, they're assembling illegally. Second, their intent on creating some sort of violence. We've all seen the pictures of them throwing Molotov cocktails at policemen, beating policemen. What do they expect? They are looking to create some sort of confrontation. To address the situation, of course you have to have an anti-mask law. Who gives you the right to wear a mask so you can't be caught for the criminal activity that you're doing? In the U.S., it's an enhancer. That means if you commit a crime while masked, you will be given more years.
Obviously, the anger of young protesting in the streets of Hong Kong seems to be well coordinated. And,
well, this goes back to your earlier problem. Right now, there's strong suspicions that are being voiced that the U.S. is behind that. So when an incident like this comes up, all right, after Joshua Wong and others have gone and visited people in the United States and gotten verbal support from people in the government, all right, who say that they still are dedicated to a one China policy. When they do this, you're going to have a clash of nationalism.
Let me go back to Mr. Hung. Violence escalated to the high just on the eve of approving this anti-mask law in Hong Kong a few days ago. Are you surprised that once the law went into effect, almost all the young protesters disappeared instantly from the streets? Do you believe that this law is indeed very helpful in easing the tensions, and particularly in cracking down upon those who violated the law in a place that is long known for being rule of law?
Well, I think the result, the implication of the law is still yet to be seen. First of all, I need to declare interest. I'm actually one of the members of the civil group that pushed for such law to be passed in Hong Kong. And so I'm obviously biased, but the reason is not just about catching the criminals. It's about people who do things when they're being masked that normally they would not do. Okay, when your identity are being concealed, people tend to do crazy things. When you see, I saw a totally burned down Starbucks yesterday morning. I thought we were living in a war zone, and these are just like young, innocent college people, college students for doing this kind of thing. So I think one of the reasons was that because they are hiding behind masks, they tend to think that they can do things whatever they want without being criticized or punished. So I think that is the whole reason why this law needs to be passed. Now, the effect of it, it yet to be seen. I mean, there were 2 persons arrested on the first day that was first prosecuted yesterday. Okay, and we will need to see how the court rules, because the first few days there were a lot of judicial review and injunction being raised by the opposition on such a law, which has been rejected by the High Court in Hong Kong. So effectively, today is the first day of working day where the law is in effect. So we're going to see. I think just by the law itself, it won't solve the problem, but it will give, first of all, the police enough legitimacy to actually remove the mask and also to hunt down all those people who are committing crimes. Secondly, hopefully, it will decrease the number of radical protesters. You know, those people, not everybody dare to disobey the law. In the past, they may think they can hide away because they have a mask. Now that even wearing a mask itself is a crime, they may think twice. I mean, I have observed that actually where the violence has escalated, the number of people who are committing such violences has decreased over the months, over the past few weeks. So hopefully that will continue to decrease, and then at the same time where the police can take some action.
In fact, many here in the mainland who have been following this development in Hong Kong are a little bit surprised that the consensus has been quickly built between and among members of the HKSAR government to approve this anti-mask law, so that those who violated the crime would be soon caught and brought to justice. You are watching Dialogue with Anna Tangen, Whitman Huang, and in the second half, when we come back, Mr. Victor Gao Zhikai. Stay with us, we'll be right back. I'm glad to be joined by Victor Gao in the second half. First of all, let me go to Victor. Hi, Victor. What do you think of the impact of the anti-mask law?
How are you?
Do you believe this law is just in time?
I think this regulation is timely and highly necessary, especially in light of the current circumstances in Hong Kong. Now, those who wear masks to commit violence are not heroes by any measurement. They are committing crimes and violence, and they need to expose their own identity rather than hide their identity behind the masks. I think the Hong Kong police is doing a heroic job. They need to hunt down these criminals, and they need to bring all those responsible for the violence to justice. And anti-mask regulation comes just exactly in a timely manner to enable the police to bring these people to the rule of law and let justice figure out who is the liable one.
Victor, to my knowledge, you have just arrived in London. Whatever the activities or public commitments, let me know, how did the BBC respond to the approval of this law? Because to my knowledge, I've been following the BBC coverage on Hong Kong. Most of the reports seem to be focused on the alleged police brutality. This seems to be the one-sided view. What about the other side of the coin? I mean, how shall we deliver a balanced media report about the real truth concerning the crisis in Hong Kong, Victor?
Now, I think any media agency need to have the decency of the mind to realize that the Hong Kong police, in all measurement, is one of the best police forces in the world. They are very disciplined, very effective, very much rule-binding, for example, and to accuse Hong Kong police of brutality is really indulging in fantasy.
Most of the time, Victor,
has a job to do.
Law enforcement, the cops, are considered civil servants, and many of those cops in Hong Kong are set up and trained in the UK. So I'm just curious, very curious as to how Scotland Yard would respond to the alleged police brutality, given the broad context that in similar cases like in London, France, Los Angeles, New York, cops there are very tough in their crackdown upon the demonstrations and the protesters. A lot more civilians have been hurt, and a lot more arrests occurred, to say nothing of the much higher death toll. So what do you think of the civility and the humility of the Hong Kong law enforcement personnel? Because many in the mainland complain these guys are too soft.
As a matter of fact, I walked to the studio just now and I crossed the Westminster Bridge across the Thames, and there are very, very many police officers here. I think they are expecting a major event in the Parliament House. And I would say the UK police or the US police or the French police or the German police, etc., you name it, in any society or in any major city would not tolerate the violence committed in Hong Kong. The police force in Hong Kong, as well as the police force here in London, they have a job to do. They are paid to do their job. They are not violent agencies. Their job is to restore law and order. In Hong Kong, there is a danger of loss of law and order, and the law enforcement agency, the police forces, are expected to do their job, to use whatever means possible, commensurate to the level of violence, of course, and to bring law back to Hong Kong. And I think this is the minimum
Victor,
expectation of the people in Hong Kong.
The question is, how are you going to solve this? I mean, you're talking about a reasonable standard. This is an emotional situation. And what is needed here is some sort of commitment by the Hong Kong people themselves that they're fed up with this. This is really the only solution. If there is unilateral action by China, the Western media will paint China as an authoritarian government who has crushed these wonderful freedom-loving students. But if they don't do it, all right, and let things play out, you're already starting to see Western press covering this in a quite different way than the beginning. They're showing these burnt-out buildings, these subways that have been vandalized, the police being beaten. Right now, the world is discovering that there is a different side to this whole controversy, and the question is, how do you get out of it?
Mr. Han, let me have your thoughts very quickly on the use of a pepper spray. An American friend said quietly, look, the use of pepper spray by the cops in Hong Kong went a little bit too far, and whoever used the pepper spray should be brought to justice. Do you believe the use of a pepper spray should be viewed as a catalyst that has triggered the outbreak of hate, fears, and hostilities against the law enforcement personnel in this territory?
No, I disagree with that. I think pepper sprays have been used widely, not just in Hong Kong, but other places as well. It is one of the least violent force used, least force used being against like a crowd. And I know compared with, for example, the tear gas. And it's not very effective, quite frankly, because when you see all these protesters in their full gear, I wonder sometimes whether those pepper sprays will be effective at all. But at least it is something that can protect the policeman when he's one person against, let's say, 10 or 20 people. And he cannot use any lethal weapon, and that's the only thing he can do. I think just like Victor just said, I mean, the policemen in Hong Kong have been one of the most tolerant, law-obedient, and responsible forces in the world. Okay, and obviously, I mean, there's some British officers actually still there. I mean, this David Jordan, the commandant of the PTU, he was originally from Britain, and he was really in the command line, and I saw him doing a very good job, and he was actually being bullied back in the UK by the opposition.
Mr. Han, one controversial issue concerning AI and the age of big data, the advantages that come along in the Chinese mainland is the pervasive use of hidden cameras or CCTV surveillance system in major cities here, PRC. Is it possible in the near future that SAR government in Hong Kong is likely to adopt cameras with face recognition, so that those without masks would be easily recognized and could be easily brought to justice, and the crimes would be declining to the lowest nadir? What do you think of this prospect?
I think it's highly unlikely. It's almost impossible. I mean, even in the past, when I was sitting at the Road Safety Council a few years back, I was promoting that we should use cameras just to look at, the cars when people are not breaking traffic laws. I mean, even then, that was hard. I mean, the argument was you shouldn't film civilians before they commit a crime. So I think the alternative use itself, having like public cameras that are fixed in lampposts or other places, the policemen should be carrying these small cameras when they are exercising their duty, like the one they use in the UK, I think. You can actually take videos immediately when you're being confronted by the criminals, and then you can, use that as an evidence and also quickly identify who it is. I think it is the belief in privacy in Hong Kong is such it's almost like a religion. I think it will be very hard to implement similar systems like in mainland China.
Thank you so much.
Let me just add one thing.
Okay,
these are people who are quite happy to go to London, where there's a higher proportion of cameras than in Beijing, and they don't say anything about it. So to leave it and say, oh, like it's in mainland China, as if mainland China is the only one doing it, is quite misleading. The fact is, this is used widely. Facial recognition will come into the forefront. But this idea that somehow you have the right to be masked while you are committing crimes is just, that goes against any kind of sense.
And by the way, the lawmaking body in the United States has just passed a law about human rights and democracy in Hong Kong. I mean, the House in the D.C. has just approved this law, immediately drawing protests from the Chinese Foreign Ministry. What do you think of the impact of this act by lawmakers in the D.C.?
Well, here's the irony. The people in Hong Kong are these young protesters, the radical ones, are calling for this. So, in essence, they've decided that suicide is better than trying to work out any real solution, because these laws are going to impact Hong Kong's economic viability going into the future. They're going to basically set some standards. If Hong Kong doesn't meet those standards, Hong Kong will lose certain provisions that have allowed it to operate very efficiently. When that does, already you're starting to see an outflow of people. The amount of tourism has gone down dramatically. People are not going to forget this week after week vandalism, these pictures on there. Do you want to take your family to a vacation in Hong Kong? This was at one time the second largest tourist city in the world. And next year it'll probably go down by at least 40 to 50%. The jobs from the tourism industry were the lifeblood of the ordinary people of Hong Kong. They're now at a point where they're cutting their own throats.
You see flights, trains, coaches between Hong Kong and Beijing, in most cases, are pretty empty. And plummeting in revenue of the Hong Kong SAR government during the holiday, which is called the Golden Holiday. We only have two golden holidays. One is Chinese Lunar New Year, the other National Day holiday. In each case, people enjoy a week-long holiday. But this time around, sharp decline in the revenue of the SAR government. What do you think of the bleak picture of a Hong Kong economic underperformance as a result of the rioting?
Absolutely. Let me just tell you the experience I just now went through. When I flew from Beijing to Hong Kong on the 7th, the plane was about 20% occupied. Lots of empty seats. I was shocked by this. And when I flew from Hong Kong to London by Cathay Pacific, about half of the seats are empty. It's really dismal. And I would say when I walked around in the Hong Kong airport, it was very deserted compared with what I would normally associate the Hong Kong airport, which was one of the busiest airports in the whole world. So I would say the hit this chaos has created on the tourist industry in Hong Kong is definitely devastating. And I think the younger people in particular, and the people in Hong Kong in general, should really take their own economic interest into account. They need to use rule of law. Whatever grievances they may have, go through the legal way, go through the lawful way, to do lawful protests and demonstrations, rather than do illegal gathering and commit violence. Hong Kong is a democracy. People in Hong Kong can express their ways in a legal way. Don't inflict mortal wounds onto your own economy and resulting in, let's say, massive amount of layoff, flight of capital, flight of talents, for example. The property price in Hong Kong is expected to decline significantly, and that will really create economic pain for every homeowner in Hong Kong. So wake up.
Whitman, who's standing by in Hong Kong, he may probably have a more authoritative voice on what's going to happen next concerning the Hong Kong economy. First of all, the issue of anti-mask law. Why do you think the spokesperson of the HKSAR government said, look, this is not an act of emergency or curfew imposed on Hong Kong? Because a lot of the locals in Hong Kong say, is that declaration of emergency law? So what's the real picture?
Well, first of all, because this law has been passed by the administration, in fact by the direct order of the chief executive, according to the emergency law, that's why they said, so theoretically the emergency law is in place. It's only in an emergency situation that the chief executive of Hong Kong can pass a temporary law without going through the legislative council. Okay, so however, the law itself is just the banning of masks. There are other power that are given to the chief executive during an emergency situation which she has not yet exercised, such as declaring curfew, such as other things, even as extreme as like stopping all press. She has the right to do so under the emergency situation, but she's not doing that yet. I think what the spokesperson said on the HKSAR government was that even though the banning of mask law has been passed under emergency situation, the government has not declared like an overall emergency. They have not no plans to do curfew. They have no plan to do freeze of capital and things like that. So
to the disappointment of most of the Western observers, PLA garrison stays pretty quiet in their barracks in Hong Kong. Nothing's happened so far. It seems in many of the Western reports they would always automatically refer back to the PLA and the role they play in quelling, quote-unquote, in quelling the rioting in Hong Kong. But nothing of that has happened. They may have felt quite disappointed for a reason a few would quite understand. With that, we come to the end of this edition of Dialogue on the anti-mask law that bans protesters from wearing masks when they express their anger. I'll see you next time.